Okay, good morning, everyone. We're here today to set some lights on the first winner project on Prince Talal International Prize for the year 2021 on climate action. Our winner project is called Renewable Energies in Togo. That won the first category of Prince Talal International Prize with the amount of $400,000. And we're here just to let you know more about the project. The project has competed with 13 other projects in the same category, and they were lucky that they got the first place. I have next to me here Dr. Bruce Campbell. Mr. Bruce Campbell was the evaluator of the project, and he would like to give us shed light on some of the points of the project.
So I don't think you were lucky. You were really good. So for me, so I'm from Zimbabwe, and Africa is really energy poor, and solar is something that can really change the game in Africa. And so, the topic is really important. So that was one of the reasons. I think the next reason is that you really reach the poor through providing public services to clinics, to schools, street lighting, to water points. So that's also a really key part of it. I think another piece is that you do link to government, and that's important for scaling and getting things changed in the enabling environment so private sector can produce some of the investment that is going to be needed for major scaling. And I think the other reason that I really liked it was because you build capacity locally to do the service provision and those kinds of things. So there's sustainability. And then you had a good reach in terms of the numbers of people reached in your projects. So well done. And I do want to ask, when you do give your talk, if you could give us, answer one question, which is I've been talking about solar for a long time, and particularly solar irrigation for me, because we're water short in Africa and energy short. So it's an obvious solution, but it's not going as fast as I would like to see it go. And so what is the barriers to scaling, tripling, quadrupling in the next 5 years?
Thank you, Dr. Bruce. Well, now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Tanya here from Electricity Without Borders. She'll moderate the rest of the session with the speakers.
Thank you, Holod, and thank you, Bruce Campbell, for your questions and your wonderful introduction. On my part, I'll like to introduce Alexandre, which is our Executive Director at Electricians Without Borders. So he will present our speakers, our distinguished speakers, and our intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. So we are here because we won the first prize of Talal. So we are very proud of that, and we are deeply honored to be here. So we are also pleased to have a chance to organize this conference. So I want to welcome our guests and just to thank everybody to be here. So Cécile, who is director from the Francophonie Institute for Sustainable Development. Karine, who is the Chief Impact Officer of EDF, one of the major electricity producer in the world. Mr. Adjama, who is the representative of the water minister in Togo, and Tanya, who is a senior project officer in our NGO, Electricians Without Borders. So we wanted to bring together different people from different sectors today, just to highlight how to give access to electricity in Africa, how to do it in a sustainable way, and also to speak a little bit about development, because it's what matters today. So we have people from institutions, from governments, from private sector, and also from NGO, our NGO. So what I wanted to do now is just to present a little bit our NGO, Electricians Without Borders. In French, we say Électriciens Sans Frontières. So we have been created 35 years ago. So our goal, our strategy is to fight against inequalities in access to water and electricity. We are often speaking about water because water you won't have water if you have good electricity. You won't have drinkable water if you don't have electricity. So electricity is only a mean to give access to essential services, and it's what we are trying to do. So why are we fighting against inequalities? It's because the access is unequal. Today, we have still approximately 10% of the world population who doesn't have access to electricity. So we have things to do, and the fight is not finished yet. And if you look to the figure, unfortunately, we are not on track to reach the SDG 7 goals. In 2013, unfortunately, we can say people won't have access to electricity all around the world. So we need to fight, and our action from institutions, from government, from private sector, and from NGO are still crucial, and we need to organize a new project. And if you look at the situation currently, the price of energy are increasing. We suffered from the COVID pandemic, so things have been worsened a little bit last year. So we cannot be satisfied. We need to continue the fight. We need to remember another point. If we speak about reaching 1.6 degrees Celsius at the end of the century, it seems to be a little figure, but in fact it will have a huge impact on people, especially in Africa, especially in Western Africa. If the weather increased by 1.6 degree, we can estimate that between 50 days and 100 days per year won't be suitable for human beings. It is to say that it will be hard to live in this region with 1.6 degree. And if you look at the figure, we are more on track for 3 degrees and maybe even more if we don't change radically what we are doing. So what are we doing? We are giving access to electricity to people, and especially to vulnerable people. We are located in a rural area, mainly in Africa, because 80% of people who don't have access to electricity in the world are located in Africa. And we try to focus on women and on young people, because among vulnerable people, they are the most vulnerable one, and we know they will be the one who will be leading the change in the future. So if we don't bet on these people, we're sure it will be a mistake, and it will be useless to work. So how are we empowering people? And it will be one answer to your question, Bruce. One major point is capacity building. It is to say, to train people, to integrate school to the project, to integrate especially professional school. It is to say, when you do a project about electricity, about water, about what you want, we don't care at the end, you need to train people. When you are going out the area you made your project, one professional needs to be trained and needs to be able to maintain the facility you put in place during 5 years, during 10 years, or at the end it will be nothing remaining on the field. So I already told you that giving access to electricity is not a purpose on itself. It's only a way to give good education to children, because you can work when it's dark. It's also giving good health to people. For example, for pregnant women, if you need to deliver a baby during the night, of course it's better to have access to electricity. It's also a way to feel safer. That's a good thing with electricity. You feel safer when you have it. And of course, if you want to be productive, if you want to bet on economic growth, electricity is a key asset. So how we do all these things? So we are organized with employees, of course, but also with volunteers. Our strength is betting on volunteers. We have a network of more than 1,000 people working on electricity. They are electricity specialists from EDF, but for so many companies in Europe, and some are retired, some are still working. So we have very diverse people working for solidarity all around the world. Another very important thing for us is to use almost only renewable energy. 95% of our projects are using solar panel, because it's the cheapest way and the most environmentally friendly way to give access to electricity to people. Why? Because when you're an NGO, you are focusing on doing good projects, but you're also focusing not to do harm, not to be harmful for people on the ground. And if we give access to people with fossil fuel, we know the impact it will have in 20 years, in 1 century. So we have a responsibility just to do good things for now, but also for the next century. And if you look at the figure, for example, Togo is a great example. They have only emitted 0.02% of the greenhouse gas effect from the revolution, the industrial revolution. It's nothing. But if you look at the climate vulnerability index, they are one of the country which will be the most impacted in the future by drought, by heavy rain, and by all the aftermath we know with climate change. So we have a responsibility to fight for it. And that's why now I will let Tanya present more precisely what we did in Togo and why we won this prize with this project in the North region, the Plateau region. So, Tanya, it's for you.
Thank you, Alexandre. Following that introduction, the project that won basically is an answer to climate change, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation when we talk about resilience for local communities in rural areas in Togo. So the idea was to develop a pilot project that gives simultaneously access to water, renewable energies for lighting especially, and sanitation, because you can't have water without proper sanitation if you want to have safe drinking water to reduce illnesses, to improve living conditions. And we decided to implement the project in 9 villages in the same region around a town that's called Notse in the Plateau region of Togo. So 9 villages that were lacking in those essential services, because our idea is to go basically bottom up from the needs of the population. As an NGO, I think it's also one of our goals, of course, is to go from the actual needs of the population. And as Alexander and Bruce said, we target the most vulnerable, the poorest, for which the models of providing those services are not as easy to find as for business actors or people who have the means to buy them. So the idea was to use solar panels and water pumping infrastructure, also water tanks that collect water precipitations from rain, and to make it drinkable. So to use also to adapt to the changing climate and to safeguard water as it is right now, to have, as Bruce said, water scarcity. So to have water in all seasons without having to take it out of the ground. So we implemented it in 9 villages. It impacted a little more than 70,000 people while providing those essential services, which for us remains a priority because, as Alexander said, although Togo is responsible for basically almost nothing of GHG emissions, they have a lack of access to essential services, so they will need energy in the future. They can't reduce their energy needs because people still lack access to what for us are basic essential services. So you have this double goal that can be a paradox to solve, and we think that renewable energy in that point can be a source of autonomy and independence for countries such as Togo because they have solar resources, so it's clean, but it's also local, so it makes sense. And it's the best way to provide those essential services, but in a decarbonated way, with as little impact on the climate as possible, which is a lot more virtuous than what has been done by a lot of industrial countries in the past. So this kind of exemplarity as well. And as Alexander said, and I think I want to reinforce that point, I think what's essential to ensure the sustainability, the long-term sustainability of those projects is, of course, to provide real infrastructure, immediate infrastructure that provides services that you can see that the people can, use, real concrete effects and impacts, but associate them with the necessary capacities and technical capacities, but also what we call, soft skills of collective management, of resources, of having people understand the price of infrastructure and its maintenance and the necessity of its maintenance for long-lasting effects, and capacity training young people, because there's, in a lot of countries, there are cases of rural exodus because young people do not find work in the rural regions, so they go to the city, and we think it's essential to keep people also able to live where they were born and to have the skills to maintain their resources locally. So, and we're very glad to have the experience of Cécile, who will also give us her experience larger than Togo of the Francophonie Institute for Sustainable Development. So, and especially the role of women, as Alexander said, and of youth. So, Cécile, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tanya. So I'm so sorry I don't have voice anymore. That's the cup, right? So you keep, talking and talking, and at the end of the week, you don't have voice anymore. No water is not going to help. Thank you so much. I'm beyond that stage already. So thank you so much for this opportunity. First of all, I would like to very much thank you, Tanya, for this opportunity to thank ESF, because Electricians Without Border, we go way. We first worked together on Haiti. To grant access to the basic electricity after the huge storm, in Haiti. And I was very impressed by how impactful Electricians Without Borders was, very pragmatic as well. And that's the reason why also, when they asked me to support them to get this prize, I was very happy to do so. Because I know that, first of all, what they do is very concrete, and it's a serious job that they do. But most of all, when they commit for a long term as well. So it's not only for 4 years that they develop these projects, but I know that at the end of the project, they will think also of what's going on afterwards, how maybe we can reuse. So in Haiti, it was the case, how to reuse, for instance, the solar panels that were installed, how to reuse the solar street lighting that were used and not anymore needed in the refugee camps when the refugee camps were closed. And it was reused afterwards in the cities, in the local authorities, for instance. And that's very rare in our development world, to have these long-term commitments of an NGO or the private sector. So let me allow me to present you very briefly what I'm doing and what the Francophonie Institute of Sustainable Development is doing. So the Francophonie, is the equivalent of the Commonwealth for the French-speaking countries. It's 88 member countries. And we go all over the continents, the 5 continents. So Togo, of course, is a very proud member of it. Zimbabwe is not. I'm so sorry about that. The Emirates is, and Egypt as well. What we do, we have been created in 1986 as an answer to our members to the two oil crisis. Why? Because they realized actually that there's a strong lack of information and training in French. Actually, training in another language than English. I'm not opposing, English and French here. It's just that I think we're probably we will be more successful and impactful if wouldn't be using only English in these worlds and maybe Arabic or Spanish or other languages. So what we're basically trying to do here is also to spread the word in terms of what could be done in terms of energy policy. What does it mean, renewable energy? That's what we've done 20 years ago. How can you do electricity regulation? How do you do to develop off-grids and also train our Francophone countries at the decision makers level, the government level, but also at the local level. So that's what we're doing. And of course, whenever there's projects that are very impactful that we can support, we are very happy to be this levier, to sparkle, to allow this sparkle, and because afterwards we know that when a project such as yours is successful, and we are sure that it will be, that could also maybe attract other and bigger investors behind. It could be the UN, of course, it could be the World Bank, or it could be you, for instance. And that is also what we are starting to really push right now, how to ease access to climate finance to our countries, to our Francophone countries, especially. We have developed a study for the past few months to assess, whether or not French, just by speaking only French, will be a barrier or not, and to prove it. And we have proved actually that our member countries, just because they only speak French, for some of them, they have less access to climate finance indeed than the countries that are speaking English. And even less also than the countries that will be speaking another language, such as, Chinese, for instance, or Hindi. So that being said, let me give you some numbers, figures. For instance, in the Congo Basin, okay, that's the second biodiversity lungs of the planet. These 10 member countries that we have in the Congo Basin, they received only 0.8% of the climate finance for the past 5 years. That's nothing. We're supposed to protect this biodiversity. So what we are doing is really we're not a financial tool, but we're here to try to make sure that the financial mechanisms will make an effort to translate or provide this information in French, or at least in other languages than English, to our members, first of all, but also train our members and our decision makers, the national design authorities, based in the Ministry of Finance, on how to develop bankable projects. What does it mean, even? We're all talking about climate finance everywhere, but nobody really know what it means truly. So that's we are trying modestly, and we will be very happy, of course, to talk to you further, because the next step is also to try to develop a tool, an auto-diagnosis tool for the private sector and the public developers to very easily assess, whether or not they will be eligible to the GCF, to the adaptation fund, to the GEF. But that would be really great to have also national development banks or sub-regional development such as yours in that process, so that our Arabic countries, for instance, will think about you, which is not always the case. And I was too long already. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll give the floor to the next person, to Karine from EDF.
Thank you. So just to make sure everybody knows, EDF is not the Environmental Defense Fund. So I hope I can still stay. We are Électricité de France. So we are a state-owned utility company. Soon we'll be 100% state-owned. But we are also the largest producer of electricity in the world without direct CO2 emission. So that gives us, of course, a very strong responsibility when it comes to decarbonization. Historically, of course, we've been a very French European companies, but we also have a very important international footprint, specifically when it comes to strategic infrastructure. Decarbonize one, and the first one being hydro. And we know that a lot of projects that are good for decarbonization, they have some or maybe even big environmental impacts on other aspects, whether it's biodiversity, whether it's moving people, for example. So I think this is one of the, when you talk about obstacles as well, I think this is one of the things that sometimes makes life difficult, is that you have to think in a systemic way. And so we have to think about climate, we have to think about planet preservation, we have to think about well-being, and we have to think about acceptability of the project. So we've been focusing on developing this decarbonized energy in all the emerging markets for more than 20 years now. In Africa specifically, we're trying to address all the parts of the business, the very big infrastructure, as I mentioned. For example, in hydro, we have a very big project in Cameroon, which will represent 30% of the capacity of the country. It's called Nartigal. And we also have more projects coming in Malawi, for example. Again, this project will be a massive impact, positive impact in terms of access to decarbonized electricity. But we are also, we've been developing for 20 years in the decentralized energy, and specifically in the solar home systems. So we started in South Africa in 2002, then in Senegal, and now we are moving in many other countries, including Ivory Coast, Kenya, Zambia, and of course Togo. The objective with the solar home system is both for very rural areas, exactly as ASF mentioned, so give electricity to women, the youth, and of course, once this population are addressed, there are more opportunities for economic development, for creating small businesses as well. But we're also looking at more industrial customers, for example, steel plant, where we can put rooftop, solar rooftop. We're developing a very big project in Kenya on this, and we also have pure renewable, like solar farms or wind farms in many places, South Africa and of course Egypt. So specifically when we think about Togo, we've been involved in the government program. We have a joint venture with a company called Bbox, and we've been very successful thanks to the government policy addressing the issue. So I think it comes back to what has been said. It's all about collaboration. We have to make sure that we hear the needs of the people first, but then we have to really be clear with the government on the rules, how we're going to make it. Sometimes there can be some conflict with the local utility, which might think that we are cannibalizing their businesses, right? So we have to really understand what can be done by the local utility, specifically when it comes to the grid, because the grid cannot be economically viable in some very small density places. But we also have to develop the grids, right? So we have to make sure that we are addressing all the issues in the most efficient and economical way. And of course, we're trying to develop many more businesses outside of solar home system as well in Togo. So to answer again your question about the obstacle, I think one of the big obstacles is the, I would say, in the industrialization of finance. When you do a big project, you will have a lot of paper job to do, but at the end, it makes sense because it's a big project. And specifically when you have the development banks, right? You have like reporting like there is no tomorrow. So there is a cost of entry, whether it's legal or finance, that is massive, right? Sometimes to the point where you really have to be resilient yourself to actually want to do the job. When it comes to small projects, then it's super tricky. So if you think about small solar home systems, when we started in Ivory Coast, eventually everybody say, yeah, it's super good. But then when you are doing the checking of the credit of the clients, then all of a sudden it's happening in a tower in Paris office, and they are very scared of everything, right? So you really have to stop the double language. You have to be really clear. When you do solar home systems in an emerging market, then you cannot do the same credit checking that you do in a developed country, right? And so we've been very active within a coalition which is called Fast Infra, for fast infrastructure. And I'm very pleased actually that Paris is going to be the base for the General Council of this coalition. And the objective is to gather all the company, and specifically the infrastructure funds as well, and the multilateral banks that are financing this small project, to make it very easy to develop the project. Because we waste too much time and money to do the job. And we are late, as we know, so we have to really accelerate. And I think the access to the data and industrialization of all the decision making will be hopefully solved by this coalition. That's what we are trying to achieve anyway. And I think that will be one of the main obstacles for the small project. For the bigger project, I think it's easier, but for the solar home system specifically, we have to be very good at that. And then, of course, exactly as SF has said, we have to make sure that the solar panels that we are installing are sustainable. They are good quality. And I think this is one of the positive of our company, is that we are very big, of course, and we have a very big R&D department, 2,000 engineers, 688 million of budget per year, and they serve as some kind of verification center for the solar panels. So we make sure that the solar panels are super quality. We ensure the maintenance, and I think this is also a credibility agenda, because if you just go there, install, and then things are not working after 5 years, then of course it's a problem. And then there's a recycling of the solar panels. So all the sustainability, it's not because it's decarbonized that it's sustainable. I think it's very important that we all have that in mind, that there are negative impact on all the energy techniques, and we just have to minimize the negative impact. So I think this is also one of the things that we're trying to ensure when we are developing all these projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much for providing that very hands-on experience.
It's working.
Thank you. And now I'll give the floor, last but not least, to our colleagues in the Ministry of Water and Village Hydraulics in Togo, which was an active collaborator on the project, and without who the projects could never have been done and would in no way be sustainable if it's not, appropriated locally. So, Mr. Jama, can you give us more largely your experience in Togo?
Merci beaucoup, puisque moi je parle très bien anglais, donc je préfère aller en français. Et merci beaucoup à Tania, monsieur Alessandre, merci beaucoup pour la francophonie. D'accord. Merci. Donc, je remercie beaucoup l'Électricité sans frontières pour tout ce qui a été fait au Togo. Je n'ai pas mandat de parler du développement des énergies renouvelables au Togo, mais plutôt c'est de dire tout ce qui est fait et qu'est-ce que ça contribue en matière d'approvisionnement en eau potable de nos populations. Jadis, nos populations des villages de cette taille-là sont alimentées à base de... Si nous voulons l'améliorer pour avoir de l'eau à proximité, c'est beaucoup plus à base de groupes électrogènes. Les groupes électrogènes, on sait ce que ça produit comme des émissions de gaz à effet de serre qui sont aussi beaucoup plus négatifs, dont l'impact est négatif pour les changements climatiques. Donc, nous, aujourd'hui, l'idée, la vision du gouvernement, c'est d'alléger non seulement la corvée des populations en termes d'approvisionnement en eau potable, mais aussi contribuer à atténuer un peu les effets des émissions de gaz à effet de serre en termes de changement climatique. Donc, la plupart des populations dont la taille, les villages dont la taille est entre 1000 et 1500 habitants, nous les alimentons à base de groupes électriques et des mini-addictions d'eau que nous orientons aujourd'hui beaucoup plus vers l'énergie solaire. Nous avons d'ailleurs un projet avec AT2R qui sont avec nous dans la salle aujourd'hui où nous sommes en train de convertir près de 450 de forages jadis alimentaires à base de pompes à motricité humaine que nous convertissons aujourd'hui en poste d'eau autonome alimenté par des panneaux solaires pour alléger la corvée des populations. Donc, c'est dire que le projet qui a été réalisé, c'est dans la droite ligne de la vision de l'État pour pouvoir améliorer non seulement l'accès à l'eau potable des populations, mais également pour contribuer dans l'atténuation au changement climatique que nous vivons, nous le ressentons en plein fouet dans nos pays. Donc c'est beaucoup plus une contribution. Donc nous, au niveau du ministère de l'eau, non seulement nous avons l'alimentation en eau potable, mais nous faisons également la maîtrise de l'eau, en termes de maîtrise de l'eau pour permettre aux agriculteurs aussi d'avoir accès à l'eau potable. À travers la maîtrise de l'eau, nous construisons les petits barrages, les petites retenues. Qu'est-ce que nous ressentons? Il pleut. Et quand il pleut, c'est des grandes quantités d'eau qui partent. Mais en saison sèche, nous avons aussi des durées de saison sèche qui sont assez longues où il ne faut pas cultiver. Donc il faut alors permettre à la population de travailler durant toute l'année. Donc quand il y a assez d'eau, on le mobilise, on le garde et on aménage un peu les surfaces irriguées à travers... et aujourd'hui, c'est beaucoup plus à partir des panneaux solaires qu'on réalise le système de pompage goutte à goutte. Effectivement, c'est pour dire que la promotion des énergies renouvelables, pour nous aujourd'hui, c'est une priorité en termes d'accès, non seulement pour la vie décente, la résilience, et ainsi de suite, pour permettre à nos populations de vivre et puis d'atteindre le développement que nous sommes en train d'escompter. Merci beaucoup. Je ne vais pas beaucoup parler.
Merci beaucoup. I will just maybe translate what Mr. Ajama said, sum it up a little. But I think he tackled three important points in the strategy of the Ministry of Water in Togo. He talked about how previously in access to water, a lot of fossil fuel-based generators were used to pump the water in Togo, in urban and semi-urban areas, and how they're switching to renewable energy as a motorization source for water pumping. So I think that's an essential point. He mentioned a partnership with the Rural Togolese Electrification Agency, AT2R, to switch hand water pumps, 450, I think you said, across the nation, with solar energy, in line with what we're doing with the project. So they all align to implement Togo's national strategy in terms of climate impacts. And one point that he also mentioned that I think is important is that Togo is already seeing the impacts of climate change through increased droughts, so dry seasons that last longer. And when the rainy season comes, they have bigger precipitation. So there's a lot of risks of flooding, of too much water at the same time. And this has a big impact on agriculture. And a high percentage of the population lives thanks to farming, so it has a huge impact on them. And the Ministry of Water tries to consolidate water retenues so that people can produce crops all year long, and not only during the rainy season, but also when there's a long dry season. So I think we haven't talked about it yet, but Bruce mentioned it. Water is important for consumption, for health issues, but it's also essential for farming, for so as a way to irrigate crops, which is essential to the living conditions in Africa. So I think that's a very important point that was mentioned. So thank you. I'll give the floor back to Alexandre.
Yeah, just to finish with, I want to give a special thanks to all our speakers for their inspiring speech. And I want to focus on Mr. Adjama, who is representing the Togolese authorities. And I will answer at the same time to your question, because of course, to build capacity of people is crucial. To have good material is crucial too. It needs to be sustainable. It needs to be super quality material, as Karen said. Of course, we need money. We don't have to be shy. If we don't have money, if we don't have good fundings, big fundings, we won't make the job, and we won't succeed in solving the climate change, change until the end of the century. But one crucial thing is to be respectful and to understand local authorities and local regulation. Because I could say maybe 50 years before, we wasn't understanding so well the regulation. We were not as respectful as we are today, and now we work in countries, and the regulations are really well done. They are very well developed. They are inspired by the best practices around the world. And when you arrive in a country, you need to understand it. And if you work hand in hand with the local authorities, for sure your project will be more successful and more sustainable. So once again, thank you for our collaboration with you and with all the Togolese authorities. And thank you, Bruce, for your very good question. And of course, for Talal Prize for enabling us to continue our project in Togo and in the world more globally. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I would like to open the floor for our audience if they have any questions for you. So.
Thank you very much for this illustration. When it comes to programs like solar energy, I think we have to worry, and I'm sure that you are worried about scalability and replicability. That's not the issue now I'm trying to talk about. In the future, I'm worried about the new technology that will come. I'm also worried about the replacement of some parts, like in the solar energy, which you are doing now, and the costing of that. I think this is not the whole of the story. We have to look forward and try from now to visualize what type of problems you are going to face, and then what solutions we are going to have. You raised the issue of the money, and I think this is one of them. Thank you. Can you please comment on this?
I can give a first beginning of answer, and maybe Tanya will complete because she's far more experienced than me, in fact. So what I want to answer is, you're right. We need to change the battery after 7 years. If it's lithium, maybe we can wait 10 years, but at the end we will need to change it. But solar panel, it's the same thing. After maybe 15 years, 20 years, if it's super quality, we will have to change it. So as Karin said, it has a negative impact. You need to extract steel, you need to extract silicium, you need to transport the solar panel all around the world, and you need to finance the replacement of these facilities after maybe 10 years in average. So what we are trying to do is to work with local communities to put in place a system which enables people to put money in a saving account, let's say, and to forecast the replacement of the solar facilities after 20 years. I won't say it's easy currently. When you are operating in a very, very poor area where people choose between maybe drinking, maybe eating, and using electricity, they will always choose eating. It's normal. It's just something obvious. So what we are trying to do also is to merge water and electricity, because water is a little bit a little bit more profitable, and so if you merge the two activity, it can be more sustainable over the long term. I won't say it's easy, but it's a way to be more successful in yeah. And maybe Tanya, you can complete what I said over.
Yeah, just yes, to complete what Alexandre was saying, at Électriciens Sans Frontières, we have first an engagement for 10 years after the succession of the completion of the project, because we are aware that with solar infrastructure, it doesn't cost during its life cycle, but there is a huge cost when renewing it. So we established a fund, and we actively lobby to our partners on the ground, but as well to our donors, and to even more largely in the energy sector, for people to understand that solar is not free. The sun is free in itself, but I mean, maintaining the infrastructure is not free, and it has a big cost. It's a big cost at the start, and a big cost when you have to renew it. And in between, you don't have any cost. So it is an issue to mobilize a model that is both affordable for local populations, and at the same time make sure that in 10 and 15 years, there's not going to be a graveyard of solar installations, as you can see in a lot of places. So we're doing a lot of work at our small level on collecting, on how we can improve the collection of used infrastructure in rural, sparsely populated areas where, you know, the cost of collecting is bigger than if you do it in a city, for example, because of the lesser density. And how to collect it, how to then like reuse what you can reuse. So lithium lasts longer, but lithium is a lot harder to recycle for now. We don't have the solution to recycle it as much as lead batteries, for example. So you have to find a compromise of, you know, longevity or easiness to recycle. And maybe an important development would be funding for the infrastructure to recycle it on the African continent, because now there are not enough facilities, and basically none of a big structure to recycle batteries on the continent. So you have to send it back to Europe, which makes, you know, not a lot of sense if you want to talk about decarbonized activities. So I think that would be an interesting source for larger investment that we at our small level can do, but we can do our part in helping to collect it and to raise awareness of the funding issues, and to not realize in 10 years that with the development of solar that we all praise, you have an issue of renewable. I don't know if Karine.
I just wanted to add as well that something that we don't see is that could be also a source of revenue generating activities. At some point, we should stop, importing these solar panels from Europe or from China. It should be first produced where it's used, and we should train indeed, people to first develop it, but also install it, and then finally to maintain them. Because indeed, as Tanya mentioned, it doesn't make any sense to send them back where, in China or in India or in Europe. And it's something that hasn't been tackled really properly yet, either by the development funds or the other financial mechanisms. But it's definitely something that we should address, because Africa is 54 countries, and it's the future of the population and the future of energy sector as well, you know. So that's definitely something that we should address.
Can you share a little bit on the technical difficulties you had, and what was the balance of sourcing materials locally and which had to be brought in from outside? And then a second question, you work with students, right? Can you say something about the impact on the students when they come back? The inspiration they get from the projects and working with the local people. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. I will answer to the first part of your question. I will let Tanya about training. We need to be honest. The battery and the solar panel are not made in Africa. They are not even made in Europe because it's too expensive in Europe. And it's a very interesting point. We assess our gas emission as an NGO, and we know something good we could do is just to change the sourcing of our battery and our solar panel. If you produce your battery and your solar panel in a country where the electricity mix is decarbonized, you will be able to reduce easily the gas emission of our organization. But it's a little message for donors, for development bank. It's good to say we need to decarbonize our activities, to decarbonize the world, but we need money for that. Because if we buy battery and solar panel in countries where the electricity mix is decarbonized, it will be more expensive. So it's not a direct answer to your question, but it's important to precise this point, I think. So the cable, sometimes they are bought in Africa, sometimes in Europe, and what is local is all the steel, the wood, the tank. It depends. When it's a steel tank, it can be made in Africa. When it's a bladder tank, flexible bladder tank, it's made in France because it's a specific technology. So yeah, I'm honest with you. Maybe in volume, we can say main part of the materials come from Togo, but when you look at the value, it's maybe 90% of the material will come from China, from India, and a little bit from Europe.
Yes, and yes, but the production part is important, but we still try to work only with local companies in as much as the works that were being done and in the acquisition of equipment to pass through local distributors of small equipment, for example, small electrical equipment, everything you need to build your structures, and to reinforce those local companies. And when we talk about locals, it's interesting because we try to reach companies that were active in the rural region, because sometimes in a lot of countries, the companies that are subsidized by donors, etc., that have the capacity are based in the capital city or nationally spread, but we wanted to reinforce the local ecosystem. And so that means working with smaller companies and that sometimes do not yet have a lot of past experience in projects of that size. So to bring them aboard the project and to work in collaboration, in close technical collaboration with them, which is something we can do because our volunteers are technical experts. So I think it is essential to work on technical capacities. And in the new project that we're developing, which is a replication of our first project, because our idea is to scale it, is to work with the same ecosystem of local rural companies. So, and to bring them, economic development as well. And I forgot your question about, of course, training and use. So students, we involve local students. So students from the local vocational professional training center in electrical trade, but also in boiler making, chaudronnerie, we call it in French. And for us, it's essential because in a lot of professional training centers, they tell us that they have theoretical training, but they often do not have enough material equipment to have hands-on practical experience. And for us, it's important to get that experience for them to launch their own companies afterwards, or to have, you know, the real capacities to maintain the infrastructure that we're going to put in place. Because we don't want to, you know, have people come from either far away in the capital city or even from France to maintain the infrastructure. It would make no sense. So for that, for all the works, we associated use from the training centers, and we're going to associate them in the replication of the project, and more largely in all of our projects in Togo. So we try to always have this kind of virtuous circle of hands-on experience that we can provide through our infrastructure project.
Thank you, Tanya. Do we have any more questions? Well, now we reach the end of our session. I just want to say something. We're really glad that you won the Prince Talal International Prize, and we look really forward to show that you're going to show us what you're going to do with the prize money. You're going to replicate the project, or you want to expand the same project. And thank you for the insight. This is very, very good information that we heard from you guys, especially the projects in Africa, and also in Togo. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Photo. Should we stay seated or should we?
I think we're going to stay.
Yeah.